All right, when you're ready. Oh, I'm starting. Welcome back to On Patrol podcast. I'm Windhurst Production, joined as always with,
Fighting Kentuckian.
and we've got a real unique, interesting episode for you all this month. But as always, before we get into that, we want to start off with our alibis, caveats, and piggybacks. Anything from last episode that has come up since then that we wanted to talk about. So last episode we did the Octoon Panzer look at like deep dive, which is coming out sometime this month. I think like in a week or two. And the only thing I would say from that I don't think we covered that I've seen a lot of people ask online is about playability and other scale. I think we briefly mentioned it, but I still see the question asked a lot, and I do think it can be played easily down to 15 because the ranges are pretty generic. The one rule that we kind of complained about with the no difference really in the shooting range, other than it's either short or it's long, I think lends itself well to other scales. So I just wanted to make sure we were clear on our thoughts with that. Kentucky, do you have anything from last episode?
No, I mean, it's as you can see, it's kind of taken over the internet. I think a lot of people are reviewing the rule set, are getting out there. There's a lot of great YouTube videos on how to play. I hope ours was kind of broad enough to at least talk to people and kind of walk them through that. We did a little bit of a dive on, the rules analysis and where we thought they were going with it. I think, again, as we're seeing, I know me and you have discussed on getting our Octoon Panzer armies ready. You've done, you're getting a bunch of tanks here soon about it. So I do think it's going to be a good rule set, a solid rule set. And I think hopefully, it catches people by storm, because anything that you can play with a few models on a table that gives you a good game too, I mean, that's pretty easy to get into. So if you just now listen to the episode, or you haven't before, or you haven't really checked anything else, I would highly recommend, review everything that everybody's putting out. I think you'll be surprised. And if tanks and World War II combat, are calling to you, I think it'll be a must on your rulebook shelf. But no other real big pushes for me on the alibis, piggybacks, caveats. I know there was a question that we got on, I think it was YouTube, that talked about the PDF may come with the rule set. I haven't really seen that. I haven't really provided an answer to that. I haven't seen that be, I don't know if that's been listed. Go ahead.
So I have seen that because I went in and pretty much after we did all the testing in the episode, I ordered the rules for myself. And I have seen Warlord post somewhere that you do get a PDF if you pre-order the rules. Now, I don't know if that is only if you pre-order, you get the PDF. But that was something they said. And I did get a link to download a PDF once it launches. But that was it. That's all I've seen as far as PDFs availability.
And I think that's pretty awesome. I think that's what was done with Hail Caesar 2 and a few of their other kind of pre-order rule set things. I really like companies that do that. I think that should be a standard now. Looking at you, Studio Tomahawk. But no, I definitely think it's a great rule set. Look forward to getting some more battle reports of it and trying out some more of the scenarios and going through the campaign. But that's all I have for alibis, piggybacks, and caveats.
All right. Why don't you introduce everybody to what we're going to talk about today?
Okay. So on this episode, we wanted to go into the miniature realm a little bit of, what's kind of making up your armies. And then we wanted to talk about miniature companies that are doing this. I want to give a little bit of a disclaimer on the front end. Me and Windhurst were guarded in a sense of, we didn't want to do a rule set rubric. We didn't want to do, a score of 1 to 10, because we thought that was really unfair, what we're looking for in miniature manufacturing companies. Say that 3 times fast. But we wanted to kind of really look at, hey, how is this company, what are things that they're doing to be successful in those things? And what are they doing that maybe they could do a little bit better? And even in spite of those things, why are they maybe a superior company in those sense? And so, we all think of that crusty NCO when you're looking at your troops that we're talking about, right? Chin up, straighten that back. You need to hit the weight room, right? Or, oh my God, how long has the siege lasted, right? Not all miniatures are made the same. Some look like they've been at siege for 10 months and very well underfed, and some look like they're a Herculean, kind of storm that could basically kill 100 minis on the table, right? So in today's episode, we wanted to examine the miniatures and miniature manufacturing companies that allow us to fill our ranks of hopefully, big quotes there, hopefully painted armies. Windhurst and I plan on using a 6-point guide, and this guide is going to be broken down into areas that allow us to kind of talk about these strengths and weaknesses of this company, and that venture into these manufacturers and observe, and kind of discuss what those strengths and weaknesses are. We hope you enjoy, this episode of On Patrol, and we'd personally like your feedback on it. These are things that we thought we could talk broad enough. That way, hopefully we get, I think, a majority of what companies do that are successes, and sometimes maybe a little bit of a weakness that they can do a better job on, but why we still go back and click add to our bin anyways. So please, examine this episode through our eyes, give us your feedback as well, and let us know, hey, are there other categories that you think, would serve it well when you're examining a miniature company and miniatures themselves and the manufacturers. So without further ado, grab your spear, your shield, your musket, and or your belt-fed machine gun, and join us on this episode of On Patrol.
All right, thanks, Kentuckian. So that the first point that Kentuckian alluded to that we're going to talk to is about quality. And quality can mean a lot of different things to different people, and it can be very far-reaching when we're talking about miniature manufacturers because of the huge array of options for what our models can come in. They can come in metal, they can come in plastic, and that they can be resin printed or injection molded, 3D printed. You can get digital files, STLs, to download yourself. And so kind of looking at all those items and the different ways, we're just going to highlight what in the quality we look for, and maybe give some examples with some companies that we have done business with in the past. So like when we're talking about, I think this is really a problem with metal models more than the others. But when you're looking at things like, are the rifles and spears bent, or are any of those things broken when they come in the mail? Sometimes you get that with plastics, and I think sometimes metal can be more forgiving if it can be bent back, whereas plastics can kind of be hard. I know with I think the most plastics I've ever gotten is from Victrix, and they've always been pretty good on the sprue. Occasionally I'll get some that have one little element has popped off in shipping, because they do a lot of their shipping in those bags instead of like boxes. But even those little pieces, a big pack might have one or two, but they stay on the sprue pretty well. They don't nothing's bent, nothing in there is usually broken. And so as far as plastic quality goes, I think that's really good. Kentucky, you want to tell us one for you?
I kind of look at this too as like what you said there earlier, like metal, plastic, resin, 3D printed, STLs. It's a great time, right? No matter what it tickles your fancy on. I know some people just like, hey, I like the weight of metal in my hands, and that's why I'm going to go with this metal manufacturer. Or there are some people who have unlocked the matrix on STLs and can just print all of their minis, can figure out the designs, don't mind paying the amount for an STL file, and then you're off to the races. I personally was kind of I've seen 3D printing at its onset, a lot of years ago, I think in wargaming. It's been around for a minute in wargaming. And the brittleness, I think, of early on, and the FDM and what you saw, could sustain for vehicles or terrain or something like that. And it's just gone leaps and bounds to where there's some great miniature manufacturers out there that have quality, 3D printed files. I try to think like the Southern Union one, the Crusade one that I've seen online that I think Studio Historia sends out of there. So there's a lot of good, companies. And I myself, I kind of do all of them, except I myself have not unlocked the STL file. I don't 3D print my own models. in every gaming group, there's normally a friend that has a 3D printer and is just, off to the races with that. And if I buy a file or I do something like that, I might have a friend print them for me, but they're still kind of a high quality. I think it's still, it could be the same with resin. When the resin first started coming out, whether it was Warlord Games or other companies, I do not think it was, the top quality resin you could get. And the models, flexed a lot. They would have issues with, arms or kind of some detail work. But now I see, if you look at Warlord Games' new ACW line, their American Civil War line, where they're coming out with both sides of an older line that was out there. I mean, they're top notch. They really look detailed. They look awesome with the rifles. They haven't lost anything that I think I initially saw on most of the present resin. There's also, I'll probably mention this company later, but one of the best miniature manufacturers for quality in my line is War Games Foundry too. That's a company that, the models have so much detail, and we're going to get to that a little bit later, but the models have the amount of detail, but they hold up. I don't think I've been ordering them for years and years. I was going to say over a decade, and I think it is over a decade. And those models I've never, in the dozens, tens of hundreds of maybe orders I placed with them. I don't know if hundreds would be right, but I've never had one that's had a missed mold line or something like that. And that just kind of goes to the quality of the miniature, because there are some companies out there that, you will have, they probably need to update their, whatever the cast is that they're doing, but mold lines can get atrocious. And you see that a lot in the plastic minis. So I think, those to my mind kind of strike as quality as well. As far as spears, I totally agree with you. Victrix is one of the best companies in the game. I love them to death. I will die on that hill. They're like a family member to me. I better not hear anybody say a bad word about them, because I'll fight them. But their spears and the way they've done the bags, I'm sure to cut costs and things like that to help give such a great value to their miniatures. But yeah, I have had some damage with them. And I think in a very rare occasion, I had some Carthaginian citizens that the injection wasn't totally filled out. And so they came with spears that had very diluted tip points. I think when it was shooting to the mold. But yeah, that's, in my mind, those are what I see as hey, this is a quality in the idea that the miniature will hold up, that it'll be able to get to you safely, and that, it's not destroyed, and it can handle kind of the weather, the playable that's on the tabletop. I ordered some Gripping Beast, French and Indian War. I cannot remember the name of the line that they sell. I think it might just be Gripping Beast. But I did have a little bit of an issue with some of the bayonets that I got from the British on there. They were just placed in bags, and then shipped to you. Still great models, still held up. A few bayonets I had to bend back. But that in my mind is what I think about quality. And for those that can just 3D print all the STLs they want, I'd be interested in hearing about hey, what manufacturers have you gone to? What has the best STL files? With War Games Atlantic striking onto the scene and selling STLs kind of straight from the miniature company itself, I'd be interested to hear, what do you think is the league leader in STLs that just have the quality that you're looking for? Have you ever gamed with 3D Breed, or have you seen those armies in 3D print?
What was the company called?
I thought it was 3D Breed or something. I can't remember. I tried to do some initial research on it, but I got lost down another rabbit hole. But they did Punic War stuff that I saw that was catching my eye. And there's some minis that I think some companies, in order to keep the quality and the miniature at an ability to print, they made them everybody looks like they overeat. Everybody looks like they're well fed, and I see it for 3D printed armies that are in smaller scale, so maybe 15 or a 6 millimeter. That's their goal, is where they want them printed. So I'm sure they're a little bit more durable than armies, that are not that. I can tell you, I don't know. You've played with the Bacchus. I have a lot of Bacchus and irregular miniatures and like 6 mil, and when they get touched, they look life scale in that size.
Hmm.
But there's some of those peltus. Like if you bump the table and hit a peltus, well then he's laying down, and you know, good God, trying to get that man back to his feet without popping him off is going to be sometimes maybe a nightmare. What are your thoughts on other companies that you've seen or played with, or just experience with quality?
Yeah, well, when we're talking about different materials, so I was predominantly a metal manufacturer. I preferred metal early on in my hobby career. I felt like metal was easier to paint just for me. And then there wasn't a huge range of plastics. And we'll talk about customization a bit later, so I'll kind of save it there. But there were issues, I think, early on, with the promise of the customization that you got from you. We were told from plastics early on that I don't think lived up. But I've heard somebody else say this, and it stuck with me. The one thing I like about metal models is they're hand sculpted. Like 99% of the time, they're hand sculpted. And that's a double-edged sword, because then it's the quality of the sculptor. And that's where you'll get lines that they do look a little bit heavier and chunkier. And that just might be the style of the sculptor and what they're comfortable at sculpting. I feel like plastics tend to be a lot more consistent across multiple different companies, because they can, if they're designing it in a software, they can just kind of like, okay, well, what's a 28 mil size, and kind of scale it down as they need. But like the problem you mentioned, and with Victrix spears being brittle, I think the downside is, trying to go for too much realism in a product that's not durable enough for it. So like when you compare like Victrix to Gripping Beast plastics, the spears for Gripping Beast are a lot thicker, and
Thick.
yeah,
Thick,
they're
yeah.
thick, and people might be like, "Oh man, that doesn't look very good," but they also don't break when you breathe on them. And I know a lot of people who like to take Victrix spears now, and they'll cut them and drill and put wire spears. On the other side of that, you've got a lot of metal miniatures which require a lot of extra work, I think, putting them together, because you might have to drill out hands to get stuff. Yeah, getting metal pieces to stick together seems to be totally random. It's like this piece glues perfect. This piece glues perfect. This piece, I'll hold it for 20 minutes and it will not stick. And I just don't understand what's going on. And another point people have brought up to me when you're looking at, do you want to go metal or plastic? And we're talking about how they hold up is, the weight. So if weight is a concern in storage or travel for you, a metal army is you're gonna get your workout versus plastic. But also, I've seen a couple people on YouTube do drop tests for plastic models versus metal, and it can be really questionable, because you're looking at a low density but sometimes brittle thing dropping versus a heavy density dropping very fast but generally thicker. And those might be things you want to consider. If you're tend to be clumsier, if you're playing with kids, what might hold up better. So I think there's a few companies out there. Warlord, they seem to sample everybody. So when you look at a lot of their lines, especially not necessarily the bolt action line, but some of their other periods, the Dark Age periods and the French Indian War periods, which I have quite a bit from them, is they'll mix. They have plastic lines either that they've bought out and added to their inventory, and they'll also have metal lines that they've added, and so they provide both, and so you can do a whole line of British regular infantry in plastic with a box set, or you can go and they've got metal models, and I think that's a really smart approach. And they've got the financial backing to do that, and that's obviously not what everyone can do. But I think if you're on the fence of what you're looking for as far as just the quality, companies that do that are at an advantage, I think, than companies that can't. So if we're talking about manufacturing companies, I think Perry does similar. They've got a lot of plastic and a lot of metal. And when you compare, I think Perry does all their own for the most part, and the quality is fairly consistent across the plastic and the metal, which is really nice. But yeah, I don't have any other thoughts on quality. Can you have anything else before we move on to the next one?
I guess the only question, like, to, quality in our mind, again, it could be all over the spectrum in metal, plastic, resin, STLs, 3D prints, all of those things. And it's kind of, that's why we don't really have a rubric for this episode, is we wanted to talk about kind of what could go to the tip of the spear, what can be still one of these in quality. So it can go to the ability for you to pick. And so people like metals, people like plastic, like you can have that, but I still think the quality has to hold up. I think, just like Windhurst said, with, whether it's the drop test that you like, or whether it's the detail that you think is lost on a metal mini that's gained on a resin or some other, type of mini, or you think the detail is better on, what's coming out in resin. And I wonder, maybe we're seeing it, right? I think since I've been playing, since I've been probably into Bolt Action, I've seen the prices on those squad boxes of metal basically double. From when I first started, they were in the $20, give or take a few bucks, and then now it's, you're at $40. So metal is definitely, you can see it throughout the hobby, is taking a strain. And I think those companies, that maybe deal in all metal, War Games Foundry, or some of those other lines, I wonder how they're going to react in the future to still keep that great standard. Now, War Games Foundry, you're always going to get a couple $100 out of me out of the Black Friday sale and Christmas sale, so don't worry about it. Hopefully that can keep the lights on. But I think it'll be interesting to see where companies, as we progress, try to look to capitalize on that quality and where it's going to go. But yeah, I'll take us away to details next. So our second kind of guidepost for this talk is we wanted to talk details. I think we'll spend a decent amount of time here. In details, what we're looking at really is a few different categories of how you can get details on a mini, right? It's an individual human being most of the time, depending on what game system you're playing. And so one of the things we wanted to start at is the top of the head, right? The face. And so faces in general on these minis, are they real? Are they caricatures? Are they expressive? Are they mute? Like what is going on with the face? And I think the face of minis can really just, it adds another layer to the game. We talked about, we would play chip-based games if we didn't like the aesthetics of wargaming and figures on the table and being painted. And I think, as you've seen, faces can, the painter can do a lot of effort to the miniature to bring the face out. And, you're talking about your triple highlights and stuff and whatever else you want to do. But there's some where the miniatures themselves, based on contours, based on maybe a little bit of exaggeration, maybe not to the quality of caricature, but that they can really make this mini enticing. And you want to buy it in your army, you want to put it in your army, or, what is going on, a little bit of storytelling in the faces on how they're seeing. To me, one of the best companies that I originally want to give a good shout out to them, War Games Foundry, when they first when that started. I mean, it's been decades now since the Roman line, Greeks, and all of those things really came out. But I was used to playing with, my dad's old minifigs, where they are printed out in a line. Here's your Macedonian phalanx. They're all one pose. They're very muted faces. They're very inexpressive. They're the true scale 25 millimeter, or, you're playing Napoleonics that way, or you're playing all those things. And Old Glory, I think, did a good job of having a lot of detail as much as they could when that stuff, because again, being a true 25 millimeter company. But when War Games Foundry came out, I just thought, I won't say that their faces are as bad as caricatures, but they have some pretty expressive sculpts, some pretty hard jaw lines, intensity that you see. Like one of the Roman commanders that I painted with his arms crossed is a War Games Foundry, or the War Games Foundry commander that I painted up to be Scipio with a sword drawn out, just yelling. You can kind of see that. I think that really adds a lot to the table, because now you can almost, see what is going on. And I'm not going to the rest of the body yet. I'm just saying faces, as far as that commander's face is telling a story. I mean, those things are just, they knock it out of the park for me. And in details, when I first kind of kick the ball, I'm looking at that face. I'm looking at, hey, what is going on in that person's head? Are they fighting for their life? Are they cool, calm, and collected, like maybe that Roman commander with his arms crossed? Are they, is that in the face alone coming through the miniature? And to me, War Games Foundry is one of the top companies for it. I truly, what they're doing, or what they've been doing, and I guess they're the same molds. In my mind, they're killing it. What are your thoughts on faces and details? What are miniatures that stand out to you, or companies that you have that you think are just killing the face game?
Yeah, so I think one thing to keep in mind when we think of faces is how much time you're going to put into painting that face. For example, I don't paint eyes unless I will only attempt to paint eyes if it's a character like a commander maybe. The most I'll do is like eyebrows or facial hair on some models. So I think it's nice that if the company gives you the option. So if they're sculpted in such a way that if you wanted to paint eyes and stuff on, it wouldn't be a nightmare, then that's good. So Empress Miniatures does a really nice on their metal lines. I feel like the faces have a lot of character to them, and they're kind of realistically proportioned. And like I've got a few, especially for their World War II, World War I Germans, and every model clearly it was thought was given to each individual model sculpted not to look like the one next to it. And like you said early on, in the hobby history, that wasn't really a consideration, right? It was, you might have 2 or 3 sculpts of standing with, port arms, and then that was it. And that's the whole arm, like that's the whole unit, is just that 1 or 2 models repeated. So I think being able to have faces, I think it's more important in skirmish games or with characters and commanders. I think if you're doing large scale armies, even in 28, but especially in smaller, you don't have to worry quite so much like how's the detail on the face. I will say the only caveat to that being is mold lines. We talked about quality in the last one, and we'll probably reference that as we go through. But I think companies that don't pay attention to where the mold lines go, and if they cross the face, that's really hard to clean up and make salvageable. And so I think regardless if it's plastic or metal, if you've got a mold line on the face, it's already a inferior product, I think, to most other companies. And there's a few companies I love that some of their older lines are like that. And like Kentuckian said, sometimes it's just a matter of that the molds need to be updated or the sculpts need to be updated, but that's a cost investment for the company that might not be practical if there's one model out of the batch that's like that. So yeah, as far as faces go, I think Empress is really good. Victrix, their plastic lines, I think especially the newer lines, not necessarily the older ones. When I look at the Greeks I put together, there's not a whole lot of variety in the face, but the Dark Age, the Saxons and the Normans, they have a lot of variety. But I think they're kind of trying to tailor those to skirmish gamers, especially when we talk about body poses and stuff a lot. And so I think that's why they put a little extra effort in the face sculpts. And I think they even realized that because they came out with the extra Greek heads, so they wanted to offer more variety. But the fact that they considered, okay, maybe these old lines, there's not enough variety in the faces, so let's do a whole line of just heads. And I've seen companies do that even in metal models as well. So I think that's real great to see.
No, I think that's a good springboard to, the next topic that we were talking about with the human body, kind of on the mini. And again, we're staying on details right now for the human body. So the posing, expression, dynamic or static, I think that I think you hit the nail on the head with Victrix. I think Victrix. One of the things I've heard, from your Norman and Saxon project is it's hard to rank them up.
Yeah.
They're so dynamic, and I think a lot of companies are going to this dynamic kind of dynamic models. In my mind, man, I hate to say this because I do have so many armies that are static poses of holding the spear, but they really add an element to the table. I like there's several armies that I have that are static armies or have static units in them, and even the Carthaginians for Victrix have some static poses that you can work a little bit with their hands to make them pressing the spear forward or those things. But Aventine is in my mind, again, a lot of their I think the Carthaginians that I have for them or that I use, they're like the successor infantry, are static, standing there. And there's still a lot of detail. Aventine does an amazing job on faces and those things. And I think it does make sense to some degree. But then when you have, if we keep it to rank and flank games right now, if you have an army where you can, put in the pilums or the swords and the shields, or even if you're playing Civil War to some degree, and you have some static or some dynamic poses, parries, even though they have the marching poses for their ACW stuff, it's pretty cool to see, especially when you go to their medals, that you can kind of flex and add in there about people running or people falling or casualty to add to the base. I think that tells the story for me, and the dynamic poses in my mind more likely than not are going to win out for me to some degree. I understand just based on necessity and still playing ancient biblical, those things like static poses are fine. They're not really made, like these are armies to show probably how they would line up in combat with shields ready. And, when you see the Roman armies like that, that's not a huge, dire push for me. I think when you talk about the skirmish games that you mentioned, dynamic poses are almost a must for me. They are, even, and this goes back decades, right? The old glory models we played with at my house here with the French and Indian War stuff, those are decades old models, and you've got the Indian with the scout holding up, or you've got, the rifle holding up or being shot. The character that is obviously, I think the sculpt is supposed to be Mel Gibson from The Patriot, doing exactly how he goes in The Ghost in the Woods. Those to me are just man, that just makes you take that picture in a tree line, ambush in a British convoy, you've got it. That makes you feel in the movie. It helps with the immersion, the dynamic pose type. So I'm a huge fan of those things, especially in the skirmish type of army. And I think it can be done well if you look, if you look to somehow you can integrate them in some rank and flank games. And I think that's what Victrix is doing with the new hoplites that are more in combat kind of poses. What are your thoughts on, the posing and dynamic versus static? And what about your armies, have you learned from those things?
So I'm recent experience having done the Dark Age armies. And I think when I calculated the army was anywhere from 8 to 10 different manufacturers all told. It was frustrating trying to rank up the Victrix stuff on 20 mil bases, and I think that was the crutch, that I was going on 20 mil instead of 25. However, I don't fault the company for that, because Dark Ages is one of those periods where you're very likely, when you look at rules available, you're more likely to have games where they're individually based and not on trays, I think, than you are likely to have rules where they're rank and file. Just because that's the nature of the period. But to counter that, Footsore, I've got a lot of Footsore stuff in my army, and I think they've got nice dynamic poses, and they still rank up well. And I don't know if it was something they considered, but the way they're sculpted, they fit on a 20 mil base. They still have a nice dynamic pose, and they rank up nicely, and they look good also if you're using kind of in a skirmish force. So I think that was, I think it can be done. But then on the other side of that, some of my ranked up units for French and Indian War, if you're your British line or your French line, sometimes they're almost not dynamic enough. And I think it comes down just to personal preference. Is, do you want your ranked line in firing line? Do you want them firing, or do you want them marching, or do you want them loading? Do you want your spear armed guys with spears up, or ready to attack or charging? And they won't look right in all situations. And I think you just have to decide, personally. But I think in terms of miniature manufacturing and companies, I think companies that offer you that variety. So a lot of companies will have, this unit type marching, this unit type standing ready, this, if it's, black powder, this unit type loading, and this unit type firing. And then you can kind of mix and match as you want. And so I've done that with some of my, British line is maybe have the front line firing and the rear line, kind of mixing up the poses a bit, just for that variety. I think you really, even in your rank and file armies, your units can end up looking too much alike if they're all the same. So I think it's nice to mix them up, and I think companies that offer variety in that regard are really doing it right. But as far as poses and things like that, I think if you take it too far, like with some of the Victrix stuff, then it can be a hassle if you want to rank and file those. But a lot of other people seem to have gotten a good balance.
Yeah, I think balance is probably key. Just to what you said, I was thinking of my own armies with rank and flank. Like, I don't like, everybody looking the same, especially if you're looking at like maybe 15 millimeter and above. 6 millimeter, it's not obviously a huge thing because you're playing a mass battle game, and so you're mainly going on the size and scope of it. Like, because Bacchus, even for 6 millimeter, has some like pretty dynamic sculpts in my mind. I want to give them a shout out for what you can get at that level, right? But I think the ability to have variation is what is probably going to win the day with most, right? And then you'll get a wider push. But there's still companies, and this is why we, again, just to reiterate, we don't have like a score sheet today. We wanted to talk about these kind of guideposts for us, because I think Aventine is crushing it. I mean, those are some of the best ancient models on the market. And when you look at the Carthaginians that you can use out of there for, I think the ones with the mail, they really are only 4 poses. I think 4 or 8 poses, and I've created a whole unit of them. They look impressive. They're probably some of the best miniatures I have on the table. And this is something where it can be a bit subjective, but we wanted to say at least here's where companies I think are, they have strengths in what they're doing, regardless of whether they're going, completely versatile, or if they're kind of holding the line, but they're still able to give you that great pose that can fit well into your army. I'll move on to the next one, which is uniform and kit for details. And again, biblical to modern, uniform and kit. How does that get to us on kind of the miniatures? How does that give us the ability for details? I'm going to gloss over this, but I think it's probably one of the sticking points for most people in this era is, accuracy. And to me, historical accuracy is always going to be a guiding light, for how I'm doing my armies. I'm a historically minded wargamer. I know Windhurst is as well. But there are some points where I'm not going to research in 1943 if all the Germans had gaiters on their boots in these things. And I understand that model companies are, the more they make things specific, probably the less people are going to buy, right? That's going to be a niche army, platoon, or unit that wanted people to buy. So I don't mean to gloss over that in a sense of, they are looking for the widest audience, or the audience that is, generic American infantry. Now you figure out if you want to paint their trousers brown or green, and what theater you wanted to have them in. But I do think there is something to where I've seen it in French and Indian wargaming a lot too, is, the British, you'll see people use the AWI British and those things. To me, that's not a huge like stopgap for me. That's not something that crushes me. I'd like the model to be accurate. I'd like it to have kind of the best kit that it can. I'm always going to be the person that buys the Ospreys and those books and do a dumpster dive on research on the internet to get me to where, okay, this is a really accurate model kit. This is awesome. I see how they have his haversack on there, his powder horn, or maybe they have the gladius on this Roman, and that's what he would have. It's not an earlier Roman kind of hoplite, or it's not a late one that would be using maybe a bigger sword. But the idea is, those are things that I think can really shoot the miniature apart. And I've seen it a lot with Napoleonics too. There's a lot of reason people will love those companies at the details. The Duchy of Warsaw, that you kind of see that new box out of Perry's, like, hey, these are specifically made to be this Polish force that was around that time. And a lot of people, have just gotten by on painting the colors on similar infantry and stuff. So I know those things are out there, and I enjoy seeing companies trying to stretch that and go for broke on, hey, we're going to give you the best and most accurate minis that we can. I will say, to me personally, to kind of keep this away from being subjective, it's not something that's a make or break deal for me. I'm going to go, I don't know if I could even put a percentage, 80% rule or something like that. But I do appreciate when the companies go the extra mile on the accuracy of the kit and the uniform and what was being worn. What do you think, Windhurst, on those things?
So the first thing that comes to mind when I think uniform and kit is if it's sculpted on the model, I feel obligated to paint it. And somebody, this is not original thought. I got this from somebody else who was talking about kind of the transition from metals to plastics with new technology. And it's always stuck with me. Because a metal model is sculpted by a hand, it's easy to paint by hand. Because they can physically, you can only physically sculpt something so small. And odds are that's like the limit of how small the average painter can comfortably paint. There's a number of plastic manufacturing companies who 3D model their models, and you can put infinite amount of detail really, when you're computer designing it. And I think sometimes they forget that this is something that needs to be painted, and it's not just going to be a showpiece where I'm going to have like max detail on everything. And I think that's something that needs to be kept in mind. And so examples of this, a lot of the Victrix Dark Age stuff has insane detail. And if you paint all of it, it looks really good. But even sculpted on the body, not even if you added nothing else of the kit all the optional kit stuff, sculpted on the body is a lot of really amazing detail. But if you're someone like me, it is such a pain to go through and paint all of it. And I sometimes feel bad because I feel like, man, I'm going to cheapen, like, okay, how can I do this lazy? And I'm maybe getting less accurate because I'm trying to paint a huge army. And so they do have a lot of great detail if that's something that's important to you, and it's very accurate. But then you get somebody like War Games Atlantic, because I'm painting up a bunch of the World War Germans. They're fairly low detail, you might even say like low resolution compared to Victrix. And they're extremely easy to paint. Now, there are some things that I don't know if they considered that in their design of these models. Like, hey, we realize we're 3D modeling these, so let's not overdo it so they're easier to paint. And then some things came out, like the cuffs on the German sleeves look almost cartoonishly big. And now they're very easy to paint. It's very easy to go in there and detail like insignias and stuff, like the different colors for the different units if you want to. But they also kind of look odd on their own. But I think that's the exception rather than the rule. I think a lot of plastic companies tend to add more detail in. And I think that's a hazard that they need to be keeping in mind, is that someone has to go back and paint this. And if you don't have the skill level, but you want to get them because they're the right price point, and then you just, okay, well, every single Victrix guy has probably got a necklace on for the Dark Ages stuff, and it's like, okay, do I paint this? I'm going to paint the lanyard one color and the emblem another color and stuff like that. But the detail's there, so if you want it, it's great. But when you're talking about close approximations to historical accuracy, I'm the same. I don't worry too much about it. I mean, in my Anglo-Saxon army, I've got some very, very late Romano-British sculpts. Historically speaking, the Anglo-Saxons, Anglo-Danish force that met the Normans would have looked almost identical as far as kit goes. I like that Victrix kind of gave them a little bit rougher look than the Normans, and you had a lot of options there, so I could give all my Anglo-Saxons round shields and helmets with side flaps and stuff, which might not be super historically accurate, but it gave me the feel I wanted for the army. And so I think as long as the sculpts give me the right feel, like if I look at it, it's like, yep, that feels like what it should look like, then at the end of the day, I'm happy. I think I'm even guilty of some, War of Independence stuff in my French and Indian War collection, because at the end of the day, when they're painted, I'm look at it and to my inexperienced eye, I'm not a historian. I like, yep, that looks like what I expect to see on the table. So.
The only thing I'll come back to, because you bring up a really good point on the detail, I think not everybody has to hold a gun to their head like you and paint every piece on the model. So that may be the exception. But I think companies are really succeeding in the detail because, again, to the widest audience, you have some people that get into wargaming for whatever reason. And you might come as a modeler, you might come as a board gamer or a historian or whatever the case may be. And I just think that's elevating the game. That is elevating the miniatures. So I think Victrix is definitely one of the spear leaders in that, and what they're doing, with all the new sets that are coming out with the detail and the historically accurate, and the side armor on the linothorax being kind of that mail or whatever it was, the leather bits there covered. And I just think that is a fantastic piece. It can create, a dynamic issue for you as a painter or a hobbyist on how you want to tackle this now work of art, right? We've gone a long way from the minifigs of everybody has a rifle like this or a spear, holding it in their right arm, what I remember of playing Ancients in my youth. But I'm here for it. I'm a fan for it. I'm going to hide a lot probably with the shield when I put it on my model. So I'm looking to probably make bigger armies than the average bear, but I definitely think it can bring a wide swath of people. And those are the companies, again, we're given strengths and weaknesses for what we think companies are doing well right now. And I think pushing the envelope on the detail and the kit and those things are definitely something that is superior and a strength in those companies. It might create a little bit of bane for Windhurst, who has to paint everything. But I definitely, I think both collectively think it's a positive. We want to see companies continue to keep that up. I'll move on to the next one, which I think is huge for me, and it's inspiration for a figure, a pose, a vignette. Does it come from a painting, a movie, or a story in the miniature company when they make them, when they make the miniature? And to me, if you go into Footsore, I think they sell another company on there where they have the actual characters from the Patriot, Tavington, who's supposed to be Tarleton, and his son, that gets killed, or the main character, Mel Gibson's son, who's killed. And you have like these really cool dynamic pieces. To me, this is the icing on the cake. When you as a miniature manufacturing company can take something in popular culture and get it on the table to entice more people to play, or to make that dynamic vignette or that pose, it is awesome. And you see Warlord Games do that with a lot of their kind of Soldier of Fortunes that are here recently coming out. I knew I had to have that chaplain for my 101 army, in Carentan, which you go straight to the movie or to the Band of Brothers series. The French and Indian stuff that we've played with, the Hannibal I have from Gripping Beast. All of these minis in my mind are just, I love when I personally see companies do that, and how they can either they get by with it by talking about it being something else or somewhere else than what they really are trying to portray it, right? One of the biggest ones too is Warlord Games with that's been around. The model's been around for ages, still to this day one of the coolest models ever. Maximus on his horse with his dog, or just standing there with his dog, you immediately know that that's Gladiator, and you're just like, this is super cool. I can't get enough of companies doing that. You know that we're all impulse buyers at heart. You know that we're going to see that. We enjoy that movie. We enjoy that period. And we're going to have that model. I think you definitely, I love to see that out of a miniature manufacturing company and on the tabletop. Those are just a few of kind of the poses that come to my head right now. And again, a little bit off my notes here, but I think it is top notch. It makes you, in my mind, a company that's, speaking right to our hearts, and i.e. our wallets. What are some of the poses and vignettes, that stand out to you, Windhurst, or thoughts that you have about when you see companies doing that?
Yeah, I actually don't know if I have in my collection any that would be a direct reference to something in popular culture. But that's partly because I think in my own personal hobby collection, I don't like to do what is well known. But so that just being saying, like, if I have the option for, if a company sells their own stuff for this rule set, I might immediately go out and see what third party stuff can I use instead, because I want my stuff to be different than what everybody else has. So I think I only say that as why I don't have any. However, I do love seeing companies do it. As somebody who wants the hobby to grow, and we talked in episode 1 of what gets you going, what, as Kentuckian so delicately put it, what gets your heart pitter patter. And I think having those things available on the market just really helps bring people in, because like you said, if there was that one film for a historical period that they just loved, I mean, it doesn't matter how historically accurate in the movie itself ended up being. If it's a historical period and they can have it represented as a model, then the person, that's how we get people in. I mean, Fury has gotten a lot of criticism for a lot of the historical accuracy, but you can go to Warlord and you can get the tank, and they sell it as, this is the Fury tank, and with decals and stuff for it. And at the end of the day, hey, if somebody buys that because they love the film, okay, great. Well, what about the rest of the tanks you're going to get? Well, how about some infantry? Hey, we got another historical wargamer.
And well, it's even that model even has the haircut as Brad Pitt.
Yeah, for the
commanders
commander.
Have the, yeah. So I mean, that's you're doing it right, Warlord. I think you're definitely, with their soldiers of fortunes and everything that they go out. Why would I spend $16 on a model unless I saw a movie? Models are now gone up to about $4 a pop, a little bit over or under, somewhere in there, and 4 times that for this miniature all day long. Take my money. Here's my wallet. If it's something that helps me add to the game, does those things, and gets my, as you said, heart going pitter patter, I'm all about it. I'm here for it. I think companies should do that more, and I think it really adds to the level.
One thing I want to add that is similar is companies that do model lines for their own rule set. So you mentioned Footsore, and I think Footsore with their Test of Honor rules. One thing I really appreciate is the artwork that they have in the rule set, in the books and on the cards. They have models that match. And I think that's just a nice touch. I mean, it's certainly not required, but if you've got a set of rules that has really nice artwork in it, that's not necessarily painted models, and you have no model in your line that can be represented with that to me is a problem. Because if I look at it, it's like, oh, that looks so cool. This artist that you've hired has done this amazing illustration. I want to represent that character, or whatever that faction is, and I can't find a good model for it, and I have to go somewhere else and buy a model or customize a model. That was a missed opportunity. So I think companies that do that kind of make sure, okay, we're going to have the art, we'll have the model go with it. I think that's in the same line, and I think it's a real strong win.
Yeah, great stuff out of again with the details here. I think detail. Well, we can spend all day talking about all the miniature lines I think that we love and what they're doing on details. And again, this is just what we're doing, our guideposts that where we think companies are really breaking the mold and doing it well. And again, not every company. We're trying to mention as many as we can that have affected us in some of these categories. But there are some out there that, another disclaimer is there's some that are kind of turning a blind eye to some of the stuff that we're going to talk about, and they're still killing it.
Yeah.
But we wanted to, as a historical miniature wargamer, if you're listening to this cast, here are things again that we think they're doing well, but input. We want your input. What do you think are details that are out there that, just break the mold for you? And I'll turn it back over to you, Windhurst, for the next category.
Yeah. And so before I roll into the next category, something Canadian said, I just also want to reiterate is, a lot of this is, our podcast is geared towards getting people into the hobby. Excuse me. So these are things we want maybe new people to think about, or for you to help explain to new people, because I know if you're an experienced wargamer, you've probably got the companies you love. But here's things to consider to help explain to other people that you're trying to get involved. And I think it kind of ties nicely in this next one, which is integration. And by that, how well do they fit with other manufacturers? Their size, their proportion, how tall they are, or how big the sculpts are. Because if you do have your own line and you're looking to expand, all of these things we're talking about are things to consider. And with integration, this is something Kentuckian and I have talked a lot about recently when we were talking about the French-Indian War period. Kentuckian was looking to expand his collection, and there was a lot of, man, okay, I like these and I like these, but how well do they fit with this other brand? And that's something to consider. Is it true 28 mil scale, or is it heroic and a little bit bigger, or is it maybe a little bit smaller and it's 25? Maybe they don't use those wargaming scales and they use the modeling scales at 148th, 156, 172nd, things like that. And then, bespoke scales like Warlord's Epic, it's kind of 12. How does that fit with maybe 15s or 10s and things of that nature? And so I think it's important, I think, for companies to keep in mind if they're doing small ranges, because if those ranges don't fit in well with other companies, then that might discourage people from getting them. And I've talked about Empress before. I think Empress's stuff is very, well proportioned. And, when we talked about detail and stuff, they look very good and realistic. And that, then when you take those and you put them up against, Wargame Atlantic's plastics, which are on the less realistic side, sometimes they, it might look odd in a force, in a mixed force. So that's something to keep in mind. For me, kind of like we talked about uniforms and kit, how if it's a close approximation, I'm not bothered by it. When it comes to integration, I really don't fret too much. Being in the military, Kentucky can attest to this as well. Like, the military is made up of people of all different shapes and sizes. I'm on the tall side, and we've got lots of short people. So I don't mind mixing manufacturers in my collection. I think it gives kind of a more realistic appearance. But I do know that can be problematic. I really love, Galloping Major, French Indian War Collection. I love the line. I think they've got great character and great personality, but his particular style, the models are a little bit beefier than other manufacturers. And,
well fed.
Yeah, well fed. And I think they're very easy to paint. And I like Kentuckian said, not all companies do all these things great. I love their lines, but it gives people heartburn trying to mix them in with other lines sometimes because they can look so off proportioned. Kentuckian, what are your thoughts on that?
I think we're seeing a new trend in wargaming about, it's not new, I think, for capitalism and everything else that's going on, but especially in business. But the idea is, if you can somehow capitalize or monopolize the scale or the period, you're going to make money off of it to some degree, and especially if it's something that when people play. I can't say that again, I don't work for Warlord Games or anything like that, but I can't say that was the main purpose behind Epic or anything. I personally don't believe it was, but I think in picking that 12 millimeter scale in there. You're making it to its own level. You see Battlefront doing this with Flames of War to some degree, and I'll die on this hill. I have a lot of old Flames armies. I played Flames of War for quite some time there when I was first getting into going to tournaments and stuff and wargaming. And it was 15 millimeter. You could basically buy anything, Command Decision, Old Glory's line, any 15 millimeter line, it would work. And as you saw V4 and maybe it was at the tail end of V3 came out, you saw them go to this like almost 18 millimeter plastic mini in their armies. And it is the size comparison to what they used to have with the resin and tracks is noticeable with the tanks. Not as bad as I think as the infantry, but if you put a American Airborne BAR gunner that's got it on his hip or one of those poses next to one of the old 15 millimeter armies, I mean it's like David and Goliath. It's pretty dang close in my mind. It's a head, if not more taller. And so there's these. I know that companies, again, the bad thing about, I think, on the company side for historical wargaming is you want to protect your IP to some degree, and you can't do that with, a lot of historical periods and troops and tanks and vehicles and things. But you want to make it to where, hey, you have to play my game, you have to do these things, and here are the models that they're doing it. And to the probably zenith degree is you see that fantasy game Conquest that's come out that's like 32 millimeter plus, and they're way bigger than anything. Like it's mainly that line, and that I think it's a trend that companies are going to, and I think it's I understand it, especially with the profits. It's not a huge gut punch to me in the way it's been done right now. It's probably a slow boil on the frog that is me. So I don't totally I'm not aghast by it or anything else like that. But I think it's mindful of somebody who's about to pick up the war game or the hobby, or if you're looking into miniatures or you're looking for that eBay deal, is be mindful of, the make, the manufacturer, and the scale, no matter what the listing says. And then that way you can see, you should be thinking about integration to some degree out there. I think most hobbyists, you can be that purist that only collects from that line. But I think we do like having all the bells and whistles, and there's a lot of companies that are out there that are doing great things. And I think that's a thing to be cognizant of as you look into collecting. The other kind of comment is the true scale and the heroic scale fight. You see that now a lot with companies, and I don't think it was like, there's not an intentional or purposeful, desire to, I think, just destroy the other person, but that's, there's some companies that are, hey, this is what a foot to eye or to top of the head 28 millimeter, 25 millimeter model is, and they're going to make it pretty real. And I think Perry does an excellent job of that. I think Perry Miniatures and War Games Atlantic, in my mind, are, they keep, this is what this person would be. An average Persian soldier isn't going to look like he can deadlift 600 pounds and, bench 1,000. And they look true. I think when you look at other companies, like Warlord Games for most of their bolt action line, it's in that type of heroic scale, not so much as a caricature, but there is a lot of dynamic jaw lines and definitely a little bit, I wouldn't say they're plump, but they're more muscular and those things in the sense of, hey, that's a dynamic pose. I don't really have an affinity towards one or the other, but I do know that they're quite noticeable on the tabletop. I think with my Ancients, I've integrated to some degree those types of models with heroic and then what would be kind of true to scale. There's one in particular, though, I will say it led me to sell off my Perry Desert War line. I had bought the box of Deutsche Afrika Corps Infantry and the Brits, and I had 2 platoons. And then I think it was a few years later, just not too much longer later, is when Warlord released their Afrika Corps line, as well as their Brits and their Desert Rats box. And they didn't really integrate that well. In the Perrys kind of came off as a little bit more of a 25, somewhere in between. And they I will say they looked very realistic. They're great models and everything, but there was a lot of extra additional things I could buy from the Warlord company that I was like, man, I'm going to have to go one way or the other on this army. I don't really like exactly how they mix. And especially in a skirmish game where you're going to be interchangeable models, it's not like I could, in my ancient, sometimes I can buy a true scale unit and keep it all inclusive and it will look good. It gives me more poses on the tabletop. It's easier to kind of not hide, but play off each other. But in a skirmish game where you're intermixing the infantry to some degree, it's very noticeable. And so it led to that decision. There's also things where, I think when you get into true scale and, heroic, that's what we're calling that battle, at least right now. But you can there's deviations that even go between, beyond infantry. So I think Aventine, to my mind, scales pretty good to Victrix and to some degree Foundry. I think Foundry is maybe a hair smaller. I know people are sometimes not a fan, but I think they mix decently well. But the one thing I have noticed is with my Italian Allied Cavalry that I painted, beautiful sculpts from Aventine, amazing. The infantry sculpts are great. And I put them next to my Victrix Roman Cavalry. The Aventine look like they're riding ponies. The horses so the models are somewhat comparable, but then when you looked at, additional assets of like what came on there or what's going in, what's kind of accompanying the model or part of it, the horses definitely looked underscaled to some degree, or maybe not as heroic. Victrix, obviously, right, is definitely a heroic scale. It's normally one of the largest miniatures on the market, I think, if you size them with anything. So I think that's one thing to be cognizant of as well. And it doesn't, again, the army looks great. I'm going to have both of those miniature companies in my armies. They look fantastic, but I think it's something that scale creep and where companies go with it sometimes, whether it's by design because they want to phase out or it's a way for them to attack the other companies, or it's just a unhappy accident or happy accident, however you look at it. I think it's something to be very cognitive of. There's a lot of research sites that you can go on online, the War Games forums, all of those things where they compare that. And when I was asking, Windhurst was somebody that I myself in my French and Indian collection had a lot of Old Glory, love Old Glory. I hope they go on forever. They're definitely somebody that was instrumental in my wargaming at an early age, and how to get them. And it was one of the reasons I talked myself out of what I think is a beautiful miniature in Galloping Major. But Warlord Games had the old Conquest line. They have War Games Factory. They scale really well. Brigade Games scaled really well with them. So that was kind of a decision for me. So I think it's something to be cognitive if it is something that you might see as a sticking point, in the deviation on true and heroic as you go through these miniature manufacturers and these companies. And then what makes a better line? Well, what gives you the most options is normally miniature I go with. To be honest, I'm not huge diehard true scale or heroic, but I think what gives me the most options in my mind, and that allows me to play the games I want to play or the period I want to do. Any other thoughts on that for you, Windhurst?
I will say that in the wargaming world, I feel like historical wargaming suffers the least from scale creep. I think in the fantasy and sci-fi world, it's a lot more of a problem. So, I mean, I know we kind of talked on this one a bit. It might sound like, oh, it's really bad, but it really isn't in historical. We're talking about minor size differences, and it really just personal preference on how you think they look. Wherein I think the fantasy sci-fi stuff, it can be, unintentionally, it's supposed to be like, this is a human from one company, human from another company, and they're, both sold as 28 mil, and they're like 5 or 6 millimeters difference in size. And I think it's not nearly that egregious a problem in the historical side. So I think we're very lucky in historical wargaming, is that you really can mix, and the variation will be no more than what's maybe accurate with real life. And as long as that doesn't bother you, you're pretty good.
Yeah. The next kind of guidepost here, we're getting to the tail end of these guideposts, is customization. And so some of the things I've written down is kind of customization is taken hold. I remember the only models when I first started playing, plastics really weren't coming onto the historical scene so big. It was metals, and Old Glory, Minifigs, some of those companies just kind of owned it, and customization was the thing. Maybe if you had a soldering iron or some glue, or you'd snips to take metal pieces away. But mixing parts for miniatures or some companies, and even different companies, to make something. I think plastics has really unlocked that, and what we've seen with 40K or other thing is kind of crept into these miniature companies about kit bashing, creating kind of your own model, a one-off, a custom, and then plastic pieces, rifles, spears, those things, about are they fixed to hands or allow for movement of the weapons in between. I would have to say I was somebody who kind of shied away from plastics when they first came on the scene, because I just liked the metal minis. I liked it, kind of slowed the process down. And in my mind, when you're picking between hobby time, gluing, and everything else, but as I was going through school and everything else, graduate school, the idea is like I had a little bit of time there, and I learned to appreciate the ability to build your army and make it your army, and kind of getting into that rather than just the filing that I did to all the minifigs and the Old Glory models, putting them, black priming them, white priming them, whatever the case may be. And I really liked how I could kind of make even dynamic poses with plastics, and just learned to love it. And I loved the companies that kind of gave you the ability. I know a lot of people hate, and I'm going to say that not lightly, hate some of old Warlord Games, early World War II lines, where the rifles, they didn't get them to add up, right in the arm, or, the grenades and those things. And in my mind, I loved it. And I think I might be the exception there. I loved the ability to, with a good plastic glue, you could still flex the rifles in their arms and get them to pivot the right way. And with the same two hands and rifle, I was able to come up with 6 or 8 poses where, okay, he's holding the rifle in this one. I used a different arm. He's getting ammo from his belt. Or now he's holding the rifle and he's firing it because I put it to his face. Or now he's holding the rifle and he's on patrol because he's got the rifle pointed down because I've moved his left arm hanging down. And to me, that was just, man, out of this one model and these 3 variations of the rifle and the 2 arms, you were able to get so much different kind of storytelling out of. And I know that's not for everyone, and I think I might be the exception in that world, but that really spoke to me as somebody who was like, man, I feel like I'm getting more bang for my buck. I think Warlords tried to split the baby going forward with what you see on a lot of their new plastic World War II infantry boxes is, you've got a lot of rifles kind of plastic welded to hands there. You've got things that are, hey, this is a firing arm, and maybe you can get some variation, but it nowhere is near what it used to be. I think the sculpts are great, and I think miniature companies are doing that in some extent to allow for the people that want to have some customization. Maybe you can do some snipping and cutting, but as a way that I think the masses really like, to keeping the work down. And that was something I had a passion in. You see the same with Victrix on the way, the Romans have so many different hands on the Republican Romans that you've got the Gladius forward, and with a couple of tilts, you can make it stabbing or doing other things like that, but it's not something where you can recreate, exactly how it's held. So the customization is key for me, and I think, for some people in the hobby, but I think companies that are striking a balance maybe with how you can cant the weapon, even though the weapon's in the guy's hands, is already fused to his hands, is kind of a splitting the baby, and probably one thing that's going to, I think, last going forward, because it seems to answer the mail on, okay, you do have to do some assembly on these models, but it's not to where you're building like a Tamiya model and the arms, the way the head's canted and all those things. But that's something that speaks to me. Definitely think some companies are doing a fantastic job of it. But I think the trend forward is now a lot of the tediousness of that is being pulled out, to my chagrin. And again, I think I'm the exception on this one. But Windhorst, what are your thoughts on that with customization?
Yeah. So for me, the importance of customization matters more in my skirmish and in my big rank and file. So like, and I clarify that. So like my World War I collection, I don't need to customize it because there's enough variety on the market in like metal models and that all come as they are, that I feel like I can have a diverse enough force to be satisfied for the size army I need. It is nice to have some customization of being rank and file, just so not everything looks the same. I think there's not a whole lot of advantage in the Victrix plastics to metal models in that regard necessarily. A little bit more, but not a huge amount, because I don't feel like Victrix gives you a whole lot of customization and posing. Like when you look at the sprue, it's like these arms go with this torso, these couple of heads go with this torso, and this torso has to go with these legs. So I can kind of make them a little bit left to right, but if I want him to hold a shield and a spear, there's only a couple of poses that really work with that. Where you get a lot of customization is in, okay, do I want a sword belt? You know, there's hands with axes, spears, swords. You know, do I want them to have a knife? Do I want them to have different stuff attached to the body? Those customizations, I think, are more important in your rank and file, so you can just give a little bit variety. And I think you can have nearly the same level with metal models. You know, you can change up shields in a lot of them. With some, there's a lot of metal manufacturers now where the weapon's not always molded to the hand. So if you want a sword or an axe or a spear, you can have your choice. Excuse me. And I think that's great. Foot swords like that, where their metal range, most of the weapons aren't molded in hand for their metal models, so you can kind of swap out what you want. And you know, Victrix, I don't think, you know, they, with all the extra stuff, and the nice thing is you get all these extra bits, which then can go on your metal models as well, and other lines. I do really like I am totally on the same boat as Kentuckian when it comes to kind of the middle era Warlord and even War Games Atlantic. The models do offer to me the ideal amount of customization I want out of plastic models. You know, I want to be able to say, if I'm going with plastic, to me the ideal is, okay, is the rifle going to be up? Is the rifle going to be down? You know, is it my head's down and firing? Is my head up? You know, having that level of customization to me is the sweet spot in plastic and where they really shine. And I think both those companies, kind of like the middle era Warlord, what's out there now, and War Games Select, they really nail that. And it's nice when they give you the option of bits that don't have limited poses. But I think the importance is that the pieces need to be able to line up. And the early Warlord and the War Games Factory. Oh, they do not. They were the early era plastics, and I think they were trying to really just find the market for it. And yes, you could customize them, but the pieces have to actually fit together, and you have to actually be able to put them together. So when you're looking at building an army, I think it's important to think, okay, what level of customization do you want to be able to have? If you want a lot of customization, then you're probably going to be looking at plastic lines over metal lines. If you're happy with the variety that's out there on the market, and mixing, you know, when we talked about integration, if you're happy of integrating lots of different manufacturers, and you just want to be able to get the models, you know, clean them up a little bit, maybe slap a shield on and a spear, put them on the base and paint, then you're going to probably be looking at metal manufacturers. So yeah, for me, that's really where it comes down to is, you know, with that specific army, if the models exist for it, great. I probably don't need to customize them too much, but if I really want something unique, then having that customization is really nice.
Yeah, I think customization is starting to speak to some people, and I think it's a lot of the 40K people that creep into historical wargaming. I think that's where it comes from. That was a lot of the early group that I was playing with when I started playing bolt action, those things. And I think it unlocks something. But as somebody, I was deeply rooted in historical wargaming, customization was never a. I mean, if you snip kind of a cool story and stuff, but it wasn't ever something that was a deciding factor. I still think, again, we're just saying these are guideposts for those companies. So I think customization is something that can definitely bring people into the hobby, but it's that delicate balance that we think, War Games Atlantic, Warlord Games, those companies are finding in the sense of what's too tedious to customize, and then what do, the great masses want. And so I think it's still being sieved out to some degree. There's some complaints with different sprues and those things, but I look forward to, going into the future and seeing kind of where companies develop from this. And War Games Atlantic, what they're doing with, the Afghan tribal sprue that came out, I have to make a note here for customization where you could buy the Afghan tribal people, and then people just kept beating them up. Like, why don't you guys do insurgents? Why don't you do insurgents? And then they made STL files that you could print off to put them on the tribal sprues that they already made to basically make these guys from the 1800s now be in the early 2000s somewhere in Iraq and Afghanistan. So the sky's the limit on this. I really look forward to seeing where it goes, but I think it's companies listening to customization and finding that delicate line is going to be a lot of hay is going to be made in the future about it, and to see what the masses want. Really look forward to hearing everybody else's thoughts on that. And Windhurst, I'll let you take the next one.
Yeah, so your last point there ties nicely into this next one, which is range. And by range we mean kind of two points, because we're talking about kind of manufacturer companies. Do they offer a large range for the given period, or do they offer a large range in periods covered? And so we don't, again, why we're not using points, because, War Games Atlantic could be penalized, but they're a newer company, and B, they clearly listen to their audience, and they are expanding. So, that's just a little caveat. You have to look, some companies, especially if they're new, their ranges might be smaller. But I think if a company carries a range, I think they ought to do it justice and carry a wide selection for that. So like V&V Miniatures, I think are amazing sculpts. They're amazing quality. I think they're, correct me if I'm wrong, are they 3D printed or resin injected?
I have the resin ones, the ones that I've gotten from the Punicore stuff. I think they've come out where they now can cast metal, because people kept calling for metal.
Yeah, and so
when I looked at their site the other day, it was metal too.
And so like that's one where they have fabulous sculpts. They're great models, but the range is fairly limited. They only cover like maybe 2 or 3 periods, and they don't have a huge out right now in those periods, unless you're okay with a lot of repetition. Was it War Games Foundry you mentioned? Like, huge variety in ranges they cover, huge variety in each one of those ranges. But that that inventory takes time to build up. But if integration is a huge sticking point for you, then when you're looking at getting into a period, that is something to keep in mind. Especially if it's an older company, they're probably less likely to expand their ranges because it's a well-established country, and they might just be using the molds. They're not making new molds to necessarily expand out the range. So they might not mix, and you might be very limited. You might have to do a lot of repeats. Again, Warlord Games, they've both very extensive, they cover X number of ranges, and they have fairly extensive selections for each one of those ranges. How about for you, Kentucky, and some that really stand out for you?
The ranges is a great topic for what you should look for in a miniature company. I think when they make both sides to a conflict, you want a war game. That's good. That's a must. And I think it has to be a broad range. I'm like everybody else. I like the new hotness or those things. And when you have a range that comes out with just a superior sculpt, and I don't know the pressures that a company is under, and especially if it's a mom and pop company, that maybe they just want to get it out there and those things. But one of the studios that comes to mind is Gorgon Studios. They're a smaller company. I don't even know if they're still in, but they made like Fallschirmjäger and Etruscans, and like several other kind of one-off ranges. And when I wanted to make Etruscans to fight my early Romans, or at least have them, kind of in the army. It was you don't see it
Allies.
often, right? So you wanted to kind of have some type of Etruscan influence, right? Whether they're beating Tarquin the Proud or what the case may be. And I remember like messaging. They have some stuff that's up there. I hadn't seen a lot of updates on their site since like 2017 or something. So I messaged them and just said, "Hey, do you have these ranges? When will they be back?" Kept getting kind of pushed off. And it's a shame because they look like beautiful models on the site from the images they do have and what I've seen online of people painting up those armies. But I just didn't want to take the risk to order it and not know. I think, another thing is Blacktree is another company I used a lot when I was first getting into bolt action. Harkening back to our casualties, it was one of the companies that did the best casualties, and whether you use them as pin markers or storytelling or however you use them on the field, I was just like, most of the casualties in my army are Blacktree. And they had a decent range of World War II. I've got some airborne still mixed in with my current airborne army. But that's a little bit of more of a push on miniature companies there's issues with Blacktrees, I think, ordering and how you get it, and it taken many months. And then some of the ranges from Ancients and stuff have been taken off there, while some are still standing. So I think when you look at the health of a company and getting into one, and companies that are really crushing it, is when they bring a range. Are they updating the range? Are they doing it, pretty regularly? Are they giving you, enough to basically play the game and do the one-offs that what you want to have? Not just talking about weapons teams, but command figures, those things. I think that's really important. A lot of the, where is that sweet spot? I know a lot of companies are doing a really good job of it. And I think Warlord Games, to a degree, does a fairly good job of it. As many lines as they have, I mean, whatever you want to war game, you can get from them, in my mind. But you see, I think, sporadic updates to some sections that came out, like Spanish artillery came out for Napoleonics, kind of out of nowhere. I remember, like, you see it in the Forward Observer or something, and you're like, well, man, if I was gaming Spanish or the Peninsular War, and then this just now came out kind of out of nowhere, but then, they have healthy lines of everything else. I still think that's a pretty decent job for how extensive their ranges are, but it's one thing where I think, hey, they only make the infantry models and like the base infantry for this period I want a war game. They don't make the elites infantry or the levies that I would need for kind of this period. I think that's something to definitely look at, that companies can, maybe improve on, in a sense, and there's ways to get by with it, just as we talked about with War Games Atlantics. I think when they went to the STL kind of swath as hey, we're going to supplement our existing lines with this, I think that was a good answer, because again, models take time to produce, they cost money, there are issues. Well, how much cash flow do we have for that? Totally understand there are things outside of just the low, Joe and Jane kind of down here complaining that me and Windhurst may do to some of these companies. But the idea is, I think there are answers to some of that puzzle in, how you aggressively, and you see companies aggressively attack it. I got to give my hats off to Warlord Games for, I think, all the ranges and stuff they do. But I think War Games Atlantic is definitely crushing it in the sense of giving you the ability to get those STLs, mixing and matching with their sets, where they're adding, just like we talked about with that Insurgent set, to just expanding their ranges and doing those things. I would like to see a lot of other companies kind of take up that mantle and crush it. And again, my only kind of harken back to what we've talked about earlier, we think these guideposts help, show how a company has its strengths and weaknesses. I will stand behind War Games Foundry and those decade-old sculpts forever, because they're impressive. The ranges are awesome. The models are fantastic. But I do not see them pushing out plastic anytime soon. I do not see them going to STL, and I still think they're a leader in metal miniatures. But it's a good take on ranges and kind of where you fall and what you should be looking for in ranges. And again, please give us the comments back about what you think. How do you think companies are successfully attacking ranges, or where do you think some weaknesses are? The last topic, pending Windhurst, any kind of alibis from you on ranges, we're going to move to price. The almighty dollar.
Yeah, the only thing I would add in ranges is I do think there's a market there for companies to fill the missed ranges. So like the Etruscans being a good one. Hail Caesar is a warlord game. Etruscans is, I think, a faction you can do, and it's certainly an ally unit for a lot of armies, but they don't carry it. So I think companies that gear themselves to fill niches missed by big name companies, we're not saying they get knocked down here. Their ranges might be small, but they're providing a service to the community, be focusing on, okay, we know no one else is doing this, so we might just do it, do this small thing. So we certainly want to knock any of the companies that, necessarily have small ranges if that's their target.
Yeah, and I mean, economics rules all. So that would be a good battle, I think, for going forward. There's a reason, sometimes big companies shy away from it, and there's a reason why sometimes boutique or niche companies can go in there and flourish. And then how many Etruscan armies are people going to buy off the shelves in England and the United States or throughout the world? I don't know if it would. I don't know if I'd put up capital for it. But it's a good way to segue into our last kind of point on what we're looking here, and when we're talking about miniatures and those companies and kind of what moves us in these. And I think the almighty dollar and your disposable income, whether you say to your wife it's disposable or not, or to your spouse, is a good motivator. I think price point is huge in the hobby, and I think getting you that deal for the amount of miniatures that you can get is good as well. Now, pricing in my mind, is the army or the miniature itself, is it inexpensive or is it expensive? And then I think good deals, sales, buying units or army discounts, I think those are definitely things that miniature manufacturers have to kind of take into account. And, as the buyer and the people that are, patroning these miniature manufacturers, definitely it moves us, right? There's a lot of times now we've grit our teeth and clicked the buy or added it to our cart when maybe it might be a dollar or two more. But there's some ways that sales and how the price point works for the rule system that get us, and I can truly appreciate it. I think the unit or the box of infantry that you buy to make that or to get that, to start building that army, even looking at it from the skirmish points, kind of starting off. I think when you look to 30 or 50 models and you're talking about getting into a game, the average price on models, I think with metal nowadays is $4 a model, which pains me to say. I mean, I almost want to I remember, when it was a lot less than that, less than half of that. And especially going to flea markets, getting dollar model, that is a steep amount. And especially this is unpainted from the manufacturer right there. So I think a lot of what you see a lot of metal companies doing in this, especially on skirmish gaming and, even looking into rank and flank or the unit deals, the army deals, those things can really, I think, entice people. And in my mind, it gives the kickback to the end user, the patron of the store, is saying like, hey, we appreciate you taking the choice on this. Please buy that. And there's some capitalism, rules going on in the sense of if you just buy X amount more, you'll get 10% off. And you're like, oh, I'm basically, saving money by spending $300 rather than just, $50. Aventine does a good job on unit deals. A lot of other companies do a good side on unit deals and deals in general and trying to meet that price point where it's at. And I think there's some companies that, even though I'll buy from them, you don't see like a huge unit deal or any type of deal like that. And you hope for the holiday sales or those things. Plastic is going to be cheaper, and STLs are kind of mopping up to some sense and price point. And that's why I think you see in this gradual trend of wargamers going towards those lines. And I don't know if $40 for 10 models, a Warlord Games squad box is a lot of money if you're talking even for a skirmish game where you need 3 or 4 squads if you were wanting to do them in all metal. And so that's definitely something that's moving the needle as we talk, like where are you going to buy, and a decision point for, a person who is getting into wargaming or getting into a different period or army. Like hey, where do I want to go? Me and Windhurst talked a little bit before this podcast about the 28 millimeter modern project that I have kind of shelved right now because I've got some in 20 millimeter. And I remember when I bought it, it was several $100s, and the price has gone up substantially, for that. I won't say a decade, but it was a long time ago when I bought it. And the same thing's true with my Airborne Army. I remember those Airborne boxes used to be $24 for 10 models, and now they're 40. So I think, as you look to see what the companies are doing and where the price point is going on the different manufacturers that you want to get into, or different kind of what is being used, what is the aggregate or the model or object that I'm buying? Is it plastic, resin, or metal? And then what is the longevity of it? Can I continue to, hey, I need to add another unit. Now I did, and the price of lead has just doubled. That's something I think to be cognizant of. I don't want to talk people away from metals because it seems like I'm just beating them up. I think metals are really, in some degree, what we talked about with detail are solid models and great for that stuff. And it'd be a shame if you don't have some in your collection, I think, if you're a war gamer, because there are just so many great periods and stuff that are represented in metal. But be cognizant of those things and the deals and the purchases. And then, patron those companies that I think look to not get blood out of a turnip when you spend a decent amount of money with them, and that give you deals. Warlord Games with the starter army boxes, those are pretty solid deals, especially with the price of a tank being almost $40 now, a box being $60. You get the weapons teams now $40 in it, and for less than $200, and I remember when it used to be like 120, you can get a pretty good sizable force to kind of start you on your way. So those are definitely things that I'm cognizant of when I'm buying, and the almighty dollar moving me to purchase what different armies and what periods and what scales I want to go with. And we think miniature companies, need to be thinking again, how are we going to separate this fool from his money when we can talk about deals, discounts, and buying kind of turnkey army jobs in those starter boxes or unit deals. What are your thoughts, Windhurst, on price kind of from the miniature company or from the miniatures themselves? What motivates you, or what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think price is a real challenging one. I was just this morning or last night, I saw that Elheim Miniatures, which does one of, if not my favorite line of 20 mil moderns, was saying, he's having to move the company into a part-time business kind of model, and get himself a full-time job, because the kind of post-COVID supply, I don't know if it's backlog or what, but even just all his line is metal, and he can't keep the product out available for the same prices he was doing without significantly raising his prices. And I feel like we kind of suffer in this hobby industry because it is a niche industry, and so you don't have as large of a customer base as other industries. On top of that, a huge portion of your clientele aren't necessarily the people making the most amount of money. And so
we're talking about wargamers are millionaires, right?
Despite the picture I posted recently saying the average wargamer looks like this, it's very challenging, I think, for a lot of the smaller companies, because if you're not willing or able to do regular sales, and you're not able or available to do constant promotions and out there on social media to really draw the people in, it seems like globally the cost of stuff is rising faster than the average, cost of pay for, a lot of the clients. And so it seems like it's going to be hard for companies to survive if they don't embrace the new technologies. And I am happy to see that the really small scale stuff, the 10 and lower, are diversifying out of just metals. I think it would have been nice if Epic, if Warlord hadn't picked a bespoke scale and had gone in with something, because I think that could have, helped the industry as a whole by having companies that also have plastic in the same scale that other companies have metal, because people can get in at the price point of the plastic, and then branch out, yep, to expand their collections with the metal variety. I think, I don't know, it's one area that it does concern me for the hobby. I mean, I'm never going to stop buying models.
Amen.
This is, I've pretty much got two hobby passions, and this is the main one. And I'm gonna keep buying. I'm gonna keep painting as long as it's, my wife lets me have control of the card. But I definitely see that I don't want metal to go away. I don't want the small companies to close. And I think that's one reason even why we started something like this. We want to bring more people into the hobby, because the more people we bring into the hobby, the more people that are supporting these companies. And I want these companies to be open, because I'm selfish on the one hand, is I want the variety to be available. I want to have choices. I want to be able to be like, okay, well, I'm doing World War II, Americans. Just I already have some of the plastic. What else can I add to give me some variety? What companies are available? And if we only have one or two companies, I feel like the greater hobby community suffers for that. So I think, patronizing as many different companies as possible and advertising them and sharing. I think that's why I think sharing on social media what we paint, not just us, but as a community, people sharing is so important, because, in a way that's free advertising. So there are so many different companies. A lot of people ask me, oh, where are these from? Or these from? And I think, oh, here's a list of all the companies I got stuff from. And I'm not asking them for anything. I don't get anything free for them, but I'm happy to show it because I love it, and I'm hoping that generates, something for them, because I want those companies to stay around. I think pricing is a really delicate balance, specifically in hobbies like this that are so niche, because they know they have such a smaller clientele base. I mean, I would love to do something hobby-wise post-military as a job, but man, that's going to be a challenge. It's hard in this industry, in the wargaming industry, I think, to make a living doing it, just because we are such a relatively small community.
Yeah, these are all good points, and I think they flower into what wargaming is going to become, and especially in the future when they try to handle price. I think, again, I'm not going to say any big companies out there are like the big bad bear, that are doing things financially for themselves to help progress, their own share of the market or their new lines and ranges. Those are good economic principles. I don't discourage or despise them. Companies that take approaches to try to, hey, this is a way that we can protect, our line or how we're going to do it, and they have to make financial decisions because the dollar is so crucial. And I think it was good to put it at the end of this cast, and as a way to kind of put a bow on our topic today, is we wanted to talk about, what are you looking for in miniatures, and what are manufacturer companies, what are some of their strengths and weaknesses that we see, and it's too hard to score. Like in my mind, I don't care how many people hate on it. Like Wargames Foundry is amazing to me, and I think that's some nostalgia, that's some poses, that's stuff that's been out there. But what are companies that are progressively doing things with miniatures, pushing the ball forward, and how do we think these are strengths or weaknesses, is what we kind of wanted to focus on today. And to just recap that list, we talked about quality, we talked about number 2 is details, we talked integration as number 3, customization as number 4, the ranges are number 5, and we ended with the almighty dollar or pound as price as number 6. And we think these are always kind of in our mind as the end user, helping us, motivate us to buy that pack of minis at that friendly local hobby shop or online or those things. And I think these are, as you progress and you collect and you build an army or a period, those are things that you need to be mindful of. And so hopefully we've done a good job to just kind of broad stroke those categories and talk about things that we see that are strengths and weaknesses. But as me and Windhurst have said many a time, like, we really want to know, what are your thoughts? Where do you see companies really knocking it out of the park? Are they some of the same companies that we mentioned here? Or do you see one, is there an unsung hero that give me and Windhurst a shot at it, and we might be collecting, from that company as well, and give them a shout out and say, hey, this company's just knocking it out of the park? Or these are some things that I think the companies can do better on and achieve those results. So truly appreciate your time and listening today on all of those things. And we look forward to kind of getting back to regular broadcasting here in May and getting back after another episode. We've got some surprises in store. But before we close out today, we're going to go back to our old categories as well. And I will turn it back over to Windhurst for Kit Bag.
Yep. So thanks, Kentucky. And so as always, at the end of every episode, there's two things we like to do. And the first one is Kit Bag. And so in line with some of the things we talked about today, especially talking about customization, I want to talk about bits saving and storage. So specifically, it can be, usually we're talking about like plastics, but I've got bags of metal shields and weapons and stuff. So all those little bits that are extra, I think they're worth saving. You never know when you want to look back and be like, man, I really wish I had a head that was like this or this kind of weapon. But that means you're probably going to have lots and lots of little pieces that you need to store. And my initial storage solution proved insufficient. I was using kind of a toolbox to hold like screws and stuff, but it's a fairly cheap one, and the lid didn't match quite tight with the compartments, so they would kind of travel throughout the case as it was moved around. So I had asked Kentucky some of his solutions at the beginning of this, and he'll share them in a second, but I just recently picked up offline like a box like this. So it's just a box with lots of little boxes inside. So I'm going to use this for lots of my very small piece, like body parts. So arms, heads, little bags and satchels and stuff, and maybe different weapons. And then
for the listeners who can't see what you're holding, where'd you buy it from, or what is it?
This is just a kind of very generic. About how big would I say this is? It's about 7 or 8 inches across and maybe 4 inches wide, and a plastic container with a hinge and a lid. And inside are, I think, 12 little tubs. So you can pull them out, and they have lids and everything. And so you can put bits in it. It even has a tab on the top. So if you have like a workshop style with hooks and things, you can put them on the wall and label them. So that's what I plan on using. This is an experiment. I'm going to try this for bit storage. But Kentucky, I know you have a couple that you've been using for a while. What do you got?
I think, again, plastics, when they first came onto the scene for me, it was sandwich bags and a tub. And so the sandwich bag, when I first started, really didn't do a lot of plastics until I got to bolt action in World War II, and you had so many spare parts left over. And I was like, as a hoarder and somebody else, I'm not going to let those go. I love mixing the heads and different rifles or hands that I can get by with in different armies. And so I did just the sandwich bags into a quick Hobby Lobby $5 tub or anything else like that. And as I progressed, I noticed, and as my armies get bigger, the sandwich bag now is stuffed full. It's got everything from heads to hands to rifles. And now I would probably estimate a 15-minute process to pour it out, sift through the piece that I need, and then get that one rifle, that one hand with a grenade, and then go back. And so it was just painful. I can't, it's not costing me a lot but time. And so if there's something that I can do to kind of save my time in the hobby, I'll always try to push it, because it's right. It's painting, playing, or reading, or researching. And so I try to be mindful that my, time is money. And so I just went to like a local, this thing I've had for years, but I have several of them. They're a Stanley, like electrician's case is what I've heard them called, or anything else like that. But anything that has compartments, kind of to what Windhurst said, to where you can remove them. And then now, it's got to be sealed, right? So they can't shift around. But then now you have all the plastic bits in there. You can even sift through it while it's in the container. You can pull it out. It helps you to compartmentalize. Well, here's where all the heads go. Here's where the spears go. It's a lot better than a sandwich bag, I'll say that. And I think at the end of the day, it helps you kind of get to that Both me and Windhurst do to some degree like to customize our armies, like to move with kit bashing and heads and those things. And I think those are great, hobby additions. The one thing again that I saw even my old man and stuff growing up and playing with metal minis is right, the little bins, the little plastic bins where you've got a drawer of 50 of them, right, and you can move and push in there. And again, I think with moving, with those getting jostled around, they can still serve the same purpose. If you know you're in your house and you're not going to be moving many rooms, like I would probably pick up 2 or 3 of those. But based on the nature of my job, I needed to have something that could move, something that I could lay out on a table, take around with me if I was still working on an army. And to me, those any type of construction worker cases where you have, like to mine, is again, it's got a clear top. It's probably a foot by 14 inches, and it's got at least 30 compartments in it. 30 maybe plus. That way, it's small enough. I can put heads in one. Here's Roman heads with helmets. Here's Roman bear heads. Here's spears. Here's scutum shields. Here's all those. And I've started to do that with a little bit to some degree of my World War II. But I can't lie. I still have some of my army's bits are in plastic bags in a box that I showed Windhurst before this podcast. But we think hopefully that elevates your hobby. And if you have other tips and tricks out there, that's what's in our kit bag. But I think you should, give us a take on what you use and what helps with your bits and kind of maintaining, the ability to do variety when you're talking about plastic and metal models. So if that's all we have on kit bag, I'll move it over right now to our scouting report. So again, we're getting out those binos. We're figuring out, hey, what's on the horizon for us? What's in the future of our own collections and then this podcast. As of right now, if you follow my page, I am burning through some American Airborne. I am about to be out in the field. Woe is me in the Army lifestyle, but I'll be out in the field for about 3 weeks. So I was trying to get some cranking done on those Airborne, and why I had a kind of a late fourth quarter push here before next week when I leave. But I think I'm about like 50. I did something 50 plus painted. I've got 30 kind of at about the 60% mark, and I've got about 50, give or take, to be painted that are primed and have the grit and stuff on the bases already. So I'm hoping to get that project done again with our local Bolt Action Escalation League sometime in May to June when that league looks to conclude, and that's kind of my benchmark, which is helping me keep my guides. Just to harken back to the scenario that me and Windhurst said at the beginning of the year, like where do we want to be, right? And both of us were kind of being prolific painters at the end of last year, whether we were in our ancients or whatever period we were doing. You heard our big quotas of hundreds of models, and I can say now at the fourth month of the year, and to be at 55 models is nowhere where I want it to be. I'm really trying to take my time with this army, but man, is it a slog. And I know, Major Winters is looking down on me in disgust when I'm missing painting lines and those things. But I really look forward to kind of getting that forward on the project. Still have those few hundred Gauls looking at me from my painting table, laughing. I had another draw the other day to get back to Ancients. Have a friend that's really wanting me to get my Moderns painted, which is why I pulled them out the other day as a distraction. So don't exactly have, and even the French and Indian War fort I bought, don't exactly have what will be the next project on the horizon once I'm done with these Americans. But I'm going to try to stay constant and consistent on attacking these for the next once I get back after 3 weeks, for the next 2 months, and get those knocked out. And then I'm really looking forward to kind of getting back into maybe 2 or 3 projects just as a way to palette cleanse and get rid of painting khaki and World War II helmets and rifles and dealing with Screaming Eagle decals. As far as the gaming goes, had a few good games of Bolt Action in the league. Look forward to, we're almost halfway done with the league. So look forward to getting a few more games and getting ready for that tournament. I know there's an event that my friend James is doing out in the Patton Museum in May. Look forward to attending that. It's going to be a Bolt Action event at the Patton Museum. He's going to have a great event. If you're listening to this, highly recommend you go. Hopefully I can see you there. They're going to do a ball, like kind of a World War II themed ball at the end of it, with food and dancing maybe. So it'll be a good time. maybe I can dance away my sorrows of how my paratroopers do on the field. But really excited about the summer. Again, I know the local convention, NashCon, is coming up. There's some game days at Track and Hole. There's a game, like a historical. There is not a historical, but there's a gaming convention in Knoxville in the next few months. I think it's in May. I'm going to try to get to go to shows where I think my work is going to alleviate as I go through the summer and into the spring, and I'm headed to a different position. So I look forward to kind of getting after it and get stuff painted. Still am being very mindful of my long-term goals. When me and Windhurst were here, I'm trying to keep those in my sight picture, to be able to knock out more of my ancient armies. That Pyrrhus, Seleucid, Cataphracts, and all of those things are just, man, they're really wanting me to scream into me right now to paint them, and I still have a few hundred Gauls in front of them. And then, as you know, Windhurst has been cranking away in Napoleonics and 12 millimeter, and I haven't even gotten my first spruce snip, so I'm failing on that front. But hopefully that's another thing in the summer that I can kind of use maybe his guides and his painting guides and kind of attack and get some enough to have a good action on the table. That's all for me. Look forward to seeing you guys when I get all my face paint wiped off here in the next few weeks. Probably won't be a lot on my page as far as hobby-wise, but really look forward to it. Appreciate all of you listening and keeping, out there and open to the ideas that we have here, and really looking forward to the feedback. Windhurst, I'll kick it over to you to what's on your scouting report as we go into the spring here.
Yep. So since last episode, I got to go to Overlord, which is a kind of a small wargaming show that took wife and the boys, which was really enjoyable. And then got the big Dark Ages game, got all of my Anglo-Saxons and all my Normans on the table for the first time.
Looked awesome.
Yeah.
That looked awesome. That game looked awesome.
It was really satisfying. Though on a table big enough for maneuvering, I kind of felt like, maybe the army should be bigger. So I think I'll be strong enough not to get back in them for a while, but I don't think the army's ever truly finished. They are finished in the way they were designed, and I'll probably occasionally add units to them as the years go by. Let's see, this coming weekend, after this should go live, the 13th is Salute. So I'm going to go down there. I'm really excited about just an opportunity to spend more money, maybe run into some wargaming friends. On the 17th, I'm pitching my training project using wargaming to kind of local Air Force leadership. Just trying to really leverage everything I think that's great about the hobby, and I think that it's a missed opportunity that some of the armed force branches aren't utilizing more, just to kind of get people, their minds thinking tactically and stuff. So hopefully that'll go well. Hopefully it won't be met with just abject, failure and turned away. But I'm excited for the opportunity at least to speak at what I think wargaming can bring. And then as far as what I'm painting, I've got some last minute stuff to get that ready for that pitch. But right now I'm just kind of going back and forth between World War and Germans and the French Napoleonics. I've kind of slowed down on the Napoleonics a little bit so I can get some time in for other stuff. So my routine I'm planning right now is I grab a group of Germans, I'm going to paint them, and then I'm going to go do a unit for Napoleonics, and then I'll go back do a unit of Germans until I reach through it. And getting some progress done. My boys are really excited for Achtung Panzer. I've ordered them. They've got some tanks to paint up and got some more coming. So hopefully I'll be getting a bunch of games in for that in the near future. Next month's episode's probably going to be a late month episode because Kentucky won't be back till about mid-month. I'm going TDY back to the States for some training the first couple weeks of May. So the kind of beginning of May, end of April is going to be pretty quiet from the two of us. But we do have some good ideas and good plans over the summer. One thing I would like to ask the community is, if you have ideas for things that you particularly would like to hear us talk about, we'd love to hear from you all. We'd love to hear it. We've got ideas. We kind of look back and see what's been well received, as far as like number of listens and number of downloads. But I know that's not always the best metric for what you all want. And ultimately, we'd like to provide a podcast service that elevates and enhances the hobby, and is the kind of stuff that motivates you all and you all like to listen to. So we've done quite a variety of topics now. So if there's something in there that you're like, man, I really liked you all talking about this kind of thing, let us know. And then we'll see about doing more of that kind of thing. But any parting thoughts, Kentuckian, before I send us off?
I look forward to, we have a few rules reviews in the future, and I think there's one that's going to be the way that we're going to attack one that's coming up. I'm not going to give the cat out of the bag, but there's a well-known rule set that we're going to attack it from 2 angles and 2 periods, and it's very popular, and we look forward to kind of joining the ranks of the people in that rule set and giving it a good kind of review. I think, anything that we can do as far to elevate the hobby, just like Windhurst said, I look forward to it. I'm excited for the future and what we've already talked about and what we have planned for the first few episodes. But give us that new, fresh idea if you think of it, and give us the feedback. Good, bad, indifferent. We like hearing it. We like kind of listening to you guys and gals as far as, what are the pros and cons, and what are the benefits, and what do you think are our own strengths and weaknesses that we can help kind of eliminate the tabletop to the new wargamer and the veteran wargamer alike. We're here for you, and we really appreciate all comments. No, I'll kick it back to you, Windhurst.
Yep. So my final thought, I just want to say, if you are listening to us on a podcast streaming service, this episode and last episode was our first time doing it, if you don't know. But we are adding video recording of our conversation. It is something new that I'm trying, so I apologize if audio isn't perfectly mirrored up and stuff. But if you care to watch us talk, if seeing us talk helps you understand and listen to the conversation better, just wanted to make sure you're aware we are doing that, and it is available when we put it up on YouTube. I don't think we said last episode that we were doing it, but it does allow us to show some things. I know Kentucky mentioned in this, like, hey, if you're just listening. So that is something we're trying. That was for some of the feedback we got. So we want to try new things. And if you've got suggestions, let us know. But as always, we like to say thank you for joining us on this patrol. Grab your spear and your shield or your belt-fed machine gun and join us on the next On Patrol. Dismissed.